All right, welcome back to NewsWire. Let's get it started with Sam McQuillan from Legal Sports Report. Dive into a number of topics, including a potential sale with Flutter, maybe moving into a different market as far as sports betting, or at least an acquisition. And we'll get into some other topics as well. Sam, great to have you back here on NewsWire. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Craig, thanks for having me.
All right, let's get started. Caesars Sportsbook making news. You guys have a column out over at Legal Sports Report looking to bolster some of their offerings. Tell us more about those details.
Yeah, Caesars just acquired a sports betting technology company called Flux. In a move the company says is going to bolster its product offerings, mainly around same-game parlays. This is a company that's one of those business-to-business tech software providers that works with sports books like Caesars to help refine their product, essentially using certain pricing technology and data the company has and their own technology to kind of refine things, make things faster, allow companies to have more markets available. A lot of the reason that companies don't have certain markets available is because their data isn't fast enough to process things. So these companies help them out with it. Caesars is a company that started off obviously not as a sports betting technology company. Obviously owns a lot of casinos. Even companies like DraftKings start off as a fantasy sports company. So we've seen companies do this kind of thing before. It's becoming quite a trend where they will just outright buy the B2B providers that they work with and then kind of bring in their own technology, use that to build what they call their in-house technology and make it even better. BetMGM just did this when their parent company Entain bought Angstrom. DraftKings did this when it bought SB Tech in 2020. It did it again actually a few months ago when it bought Sports IQ Analytics. So this is something we're seeing more and more of. And it's interesting to see a company like Caesars, which has kind of been talking about focusing on iGaming and casinos and leveraging customers in that base, do something here to kind of bolster its sports betting business. And this is a company they say has really helped them expand Major League Baseball offerings. If you couldn't combine things in a parlay before, like Aaron Judge to score a home run, Luis Gil to record over 6.5 strikeouts, and the Yankees to win. If you couldn't do that before, you can now. It's allowing people, more options so they don't go to a competitor. It's interesting to see them do this move now ahead of football season. You have to think maybe they're cooking up something there. Obviously, parlays are very popular. Football, very popular. Not breaking news there. So it's interesting to see Caesars. Maybe that's what they're preparing for. You don't know how long this kind of integration will take place, but I would be surprised if this is the last sort of deal like this that we see for a while.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear a lot more news about sports betting and some different options from all of the books as we get closer to football season, and we're almost there. And speaking of which, in advance of football season, there's a panel going on, I believe next week, if I'm not mistaken, a pro sports betting panel. I know you guys wrote about this over at Legal Sports Report, and so naturally, what I wanted to see, Sam, is, okay, who are the pro sports bettors, right? Like, who is going to be speaking there? And none other than, I think I saw Billy Walters speaking at this panel too, and he doesn't do a lot of these.
Yes, correct, Craig. Yeah, Billy Walters will be speaking at the National Council of Legislators from Gaming States, which is this conference that meets twice a year, which is pretty important, actually. You see a lot of ideas come out of this stuff. Last year, they met in Colorado, I think, in around October. And then you had one company talk about certain fantasy sports companies that they thought were doing sports betting. And then all of a sudden, you had almost, I think, over a dozen states just slowly roll out over that very topic. So it's really a place where these ideas come to the forefront. You have lawmakers from all around the country sharing ideas, learning from different panels. A lot of the times it'll be new states that, hey, we haven't had sports betting for a while. How do you do it in New Jersey, per se? They learn from those people, or they get inspired. You actually just had a conference a couple of months ago where Massachusetts regulators said they were inspired by Michigan cracking down on Bovada. So then they're going to go crack down on them. But to your point about having the gamblers' voice, quote unquote, heard, this is going to be the first year that they have folks like Billy Walters, obviously a legendary sports bettor. They're going to have Richard Schoitz as well. I hope I'm saying his last name correctly. I only ever see it online. Who's also an industry veteran, as well as a guy we've talked about on the show before, Spanky Gadun Karolos, who has a pretty big following online. He obviously is named in that lawsuit that someone filed against him and DraftKings for extortion and illegal betting. He's denied all those charges. My colleague Mike Mazzio caught up with the guy who essentially runs the conference known as Nickel G's. He's a a congressman from West Virginia, or a representative rather from West Virginia, who said that's not really an issue, this lawsuit. It's not really any of our business. What they're expected to talk about is going to be some of his business. It's going to be talking about limiting players, which we've talked about on this show a bunch.
Right.
Very hot topic in the industry right now. Essentially, if you have someone whose money is too good or someone who's winning too much at a certain book, they can get limited, or for a myriad of other reasons as well. But that's really why people bang the drum saying, why can't I bet here? I want to be able to bet. It's not fair that you squeeze me out. Massachusetts has taken up the mantle and talking about this and kind of making it relevant. I think it pissed a lot of regulators off, not just in Massachusetts, when the sports books didn't show up to that panel where they were supposed to answer these questions. That's supposed to happen now in the coming months, but I imagine that'll be a big topic at the conference, especially because Billy Walters has called it like supposedly his dream to have a state where you are not limiting players and people can sort of bet freely. So it should be a really interesting conference this go around with some new topics. And I imagine just hearing about it and learning about it will inspire a lot of states to take action of their own, similar to Massachusetts.
Yeah, I like the idea. And so, naturally it's, kind of hard to identify who these pro sports bettors are, but maybe some context given next week to see just exactly how this industry moves forward. Again, maybe potentially limiting sports bettors as well. I'm always curious about that. Also curious about Flutter's interest in this potential deal with Penn Entertainment and Boyd. Is it possible Flutter is looking to take this company on? Is there an acquisition in line here?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Sort of the talk of Penn acquisition became a relevant thing again a few months ago, May 31st. One investor sent a letter basically urging the company to sell after Boyd had tried to make this takeover bid to acquire Penn. But where Flutter comes into play here is Boyd Gaming isn't really in the online sports betting business like a company like Flutter is. FanDuel obviously is pretty much the number one sports book, number one or number two, depending on what state you look at in terms of the market. But where Flutter would come in, it actually has a partnership with Boyd right now, where because Boyd has so many casinos in different states, Flutter does not have a physical presence in states like Boyd. It uses Boyd's physical presence to give it market access in certain states, and in exchange to give Boyd about 5% of the proceeds they get from FanDuel in those states. Where they would come in here is if Boyd were to take over Penn, then Flutter would probably be involved in facilitating that deal by acquiring the quote unquote interactive segment that Penn has. That's ESPN Bet, which is pretty much a
Right.
$2 billion question that looms over this whole thing. Then you have Disney getting involved. Like, hey, we signed on with Penn. We took years and years to, get into this. We wanted to make sure we found the right partner and everything. All of a sudden, now we're going to be partnering with FanDuel. So it becomes tricky when you think about all the different parties involved, whether or not there's an escape clause for Disney under that circumstance. It's something to consider as well. We don't have the full parameters of the deal, but we are seeing Penn stock really on the upswing. It's up about like 35% ever since this takeover bid was made, ever since this letter from the investors came out as well. So there's a lot of pressure for Penn to sell, but Penn has been in this for a long time, and they just sort of restarted their whole sports betting thing by getting rid of Barstool last year and getting in with ESPN Bet. So this would be another big shakeup. Either way it turns out, it could be big for Flutter, could be bad for Penn, could be good for Boyd, could be bad for everybody. Who knows? We'll have to see.
Yeah, no, it's still a long ways away from it. It's just, I guess, noteworthy at this point. We've seen Fanatics and some of these other companies jumping in. We've seen some companies exiting out. I know Betway left this past week, and I think it's just noteworthy that a company like Flutter would even consider buying, another one of these entities when a lot of them are actually leaving too. So it makes me think that maybe there's more to some of these stories. But we'll get to that when we get there. Sam, thanks again for coming on NewsWire.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Craig.